On Wednesday, international media freedom advocacy group Reporters Without Borders came to Albania to hold a one-day conference. This was in partnership with the Albanian Media Council. Now, the idea was to sit with local media stakeholders, journalists, pedagogues, everyone in between, and to discuss the challenges faced by the sector. Then they have come together to create proposals which will be made public, and if the government wants to consider them, etc., they are welcome to do so. Now, I'm joined today by Pavol, the head of Europe and the Western Balkans at Reporters Without Borders. Pavol, welcome to Inside Albania. Welcome to my studio. It's a pleasure to have you here in person and to be able to talk about media freedom in Albania, the issues, any glimmers of hope there might be, and the conference yesterday. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
How are you enjoying Albania so far?
Albania is a beautiful country. It's a very important country in the Balkans. And I think that journalists and citizens deserve better than what they actually have to go through right now.
And, well, this goes into my first question. Albania ranks worst in the region, last in the region, and second last in Europe in the Western Balkans in last year's World Press Freedom Index. That makes me feel quite depressed, to be honest, that we're ranking last out of, I think, second to last out of 40 countries and last out of the Balkan region. Why is it so bad here? Is it that other countries are doing a lot better and are progressing quickly and we're being left behind, or are we really that bad?
Look, in the Western Balkans, there are two groups of countries. Albania is in the worst group with Serbia and Bosnia. And the situation here is really, really difficult for journalists, for press freedom, and for the right to information of the citizens, their right to quality information. And there are really systemic causes to these problems. And unfortunately, I have to observe that since I came here last time in November 2022, there has been no significant change. In fact, there has been a stagnation. And yesterday at the conference that RSF organized with the Media Council of Albania, I think there was a general agreement on the problems. These vary from safety of journalists, physical attacks, smear campaigns, gag lawsuits, to insufficient implementation of the legislation on access to information and protection of confidentiality of sources, lack of sustainable revenue models of media associations, distorted independence, copyright enforcement, and advertising market, and of course, the elephant in the room. It was not the elephant in our room yesterday, but often it is the case here in Albania, is the concentration of major media in the hands of owners, using them as tools of political and economic influence, coupled with low standards of transparency of ownership and funding. And we can go on like this, talk about the lack of independence of the media regulator, of the public media, and we can finish with breaches of journalistic ethics and of the general trust in media.
So it's not just, we can't just say it's the government's fault, it's the media owner's fault, it's the journalist's fault. This is a problem which is due to multiple parts of society. It's the public, they don't trust the media. We've got media owners with their fingers in lots of different pies who use the media for their vested interest. We have bad working conditions for journalists. Maybe they don't have contracts, the rules aren't enforced, they can't just go to court and settle it there for various different reasons. Amongst journalists as well, they're copying and pasting. The amount of times my work has been copied, pasted, shared, and then they don't take it down, or not checking sources, not checking facts, reporting on crimes involving minors, for example, and publishing a picture of them and being unethical, right up to the issues which come from the state, from the government, lack of information, not getting answers from institutions, problems with politicians from every angle who quite enjoy intimidating the media sometimes. This is a very broad issue. It's not like in other countries in Europe, where it's maybe just problems with the law or problems with ownership. This is something, from what I understand, which touches every aspect of our society in a way.
Yes, correct. And we have to say that the problems we see in Albania exist in different levels and proportions in other European countries. You know, the attempt to politically control the flow of information, the collusion between media, business, politics, disinformation, fake news on social networks, and of course the undermining of the sustainability, economic sustainability of media by the digital platforms like Meta, and even now with by the artificial intelligence. But I mean, what I really want to stress here is that yes, although the even the World Press Freedom Index is not a ranking of governments; it's a ranking of countries.
Yes.
Governments do have a big responsibility, and many of the problems here in Albania can be traced to the political environment. There are systemic problems, but governments have special responsibility. And we think, and maybe I would start here on a more positive note, that there is a opportunity for change, which is the accelerated EU integration process. And of course, it depends on the government to change its attitude.
I mean, I would argue as well that this issue with politicians in Albania, it's not just from this government. I mean, if you look at what was happening before with previous governments, and I mean, I've been pressured by politicians from both sides of the political, actually probably more by the opposition. I was taking photos in a protest in December 2022, and I was threatened, and two protesters tried to climb over a barrier to, I assume, attack me. And when I wrote about it on social media, I received harassment saying that I should take this information down because it makes them look bad, etc. It happens from all angles. It's a culture of not respecting the work of journalists, which I think extends into multiple areas and doesn't have a political colour. But you mentioned positivity then. What is getting better? I mean, the government there have been some signals. They are open to discussion or consultation. You had this forum, this conference in Tirana yesterday where members of the media community came. There were experts, there were people from the EU, from the Council of Europe. What was the aim of the conference and what came out of it? I've attended lots of conferences, you know, where everyone talks about how bad everything is and then everyone goes home. What came out of this conference?
RSF is interested in improving the situation based on a transparent and trustful approach. This conference, organized by RSF and Albania Media Council, and gathering really the key journalists in the country, aim to identify, agree on the diagnostics, on the problems. I think we more or less reached an agreement on that, and now the next step is together with the Media Council, with the Albanian journalists, draft recommendations directed to national and European authorities. You know, the context being the EU enlargement, and we will do this in a very transparent way. We will publish these recommendations, and we'll see what happens. I think you know, it's really important to come with specific proposals. Yes. What needs to be changed, and this change and this environment, somehow this transformation is going to happen also as a result of Albania's accession to the EU. We have a new European legislation, European Media Freedom Act, which is the best international law, the best international standard on media freedom, and Albania will have to adhere to that, and will have to also somehow accept it into its own system. And we have also other European measures that are in force today, so that is going to happen, and here we really need to defend the interests of and rights of journalists in Albania, independent journalists, and of the citizens of their right to information, and do this in a way to build trust. Because yes, there is a lack of trust today between journalists themselves, between the authorities and journalists, and between the media and the public.
I am worried about possible pushback on some of the proposals and points, or not pushback, but how you're going to be able to tackle them. Funding, for example. We know that there is a concentration of media ownership in the country. These are big businesses. They have interests in regulated sectors. Their interest is not to change that. It works quite well for them, to the detriment of journalists. Problems with working conditions. Previous attempts to set up journalist unions have been very difficult. There is one now that has been set up. Let's see how it will roll out, whether it will be effective. But I do see there are issues here where the media actors within the media ecosystem won't want to change, because how it is now benefits them. How do you think to overcome this?
The European legislation, this new European Media Freedom Act, already offers us some instruments. And it's a binding legislation that also Albania will have to adhere to if it wants to enter the EU. This is there are provisions there about transparency of ownership and funding. There is also a provision about the independence of editorial offices of private media, not only public media, but also private media. So I think really the key issue here is that if Albania wants to enter the EU, and a vast majority of Albanians do want that, there must be, I think there will be local pressure to change the situation. How exactly these laws will look like, I think that's really a question for the local journalist. But yes, I mean, these problems do exist also in France, but not in this proportion. But we will do our best also to look into international best practices, how these problems have been addressed successfully in some countries, and it has been the case.
It's complex when it comes to how media can fund themselves. I know from my experience with the previous portal, that we ended up with no money and had to close. It's subscription models, for example. Albania is a mainly cash-based economy. People don't really use cards. It's increasing more, but they don't really use them so much. It's a very poor country. We have hundreds of online portals, channels, social media. People don't want to spend 2, 5, 10 euros a month for content, and then if you ask for donations, this is not reliable. It doesn't allow media to plan forward. Then if you rely on funding from NGOs and embassies, I think there are problems with independence there. It's not sustainable long term. It's also a high administrative burden. So we need to figure out in an Albanian context, if the money is not coming from a big business, another regulated sector, or in the case of some media, political parties or the black market, how are we going to ensure that we are sustainable in the long term? This is going to be the big challenge.
I come from also a post-communist country, Slovakia, which currently has government hostile to journalists. But there are these very strong independent media with very successful subscription models. And it's a country that historically has been poorer than the Western European countries, and these subscription models, they did develop. I believe it's possible in Albania, and of course there is an interest not to develop it and depend on politically distributed advertisement in total opacity and for favors in terms of independence. But I believe it's possible. If it's possible in Slovakia, if it's possible on this small market, there are also other countries. So, but we really do need also a government in Albania that is friendly with journalists and that shows real willingness to support press freedom. For the moment, we don't really see it. This is what I hear a lot here in Albania from various actors. We, of course, we will be very vigilant about any proposal that the government makes, and I'm concerned about this commission on disinformation that is being created in the parliament by the ruling majority. So we are very vigilant, and we will try to work with the local journalists to improve their conditions of work.
And in fact, so this commission, I was going to talk about it after, but I'll talk about it now since you're here. So the Interior Minister announced last week on Facebook that this committee would be created. It's been voted on now. It will be... it's going to happen. The Speaker of Parliament has contacted the US State Department to ask for their assistance, oversight, expertise in it. And actually the opposition, or the leader of the opposition parliamentary group, I get a bit confused because the opposition's so split up at the moment, I'm not really sure who's in charge of what. Gazmund Bardi has said that any reference to media must be removed from the scope of the commission, and that it's necessary to handle the matter sensitively and with great care. So I think people's antennas are sort of twitching slightly at this. Obviously, after we had the anti-Spiefje, the law that they tried to do a few years ago, I think the possible inclusion of media in this commission, people were sort of immediately on edge. But I think people are going to be switched on to this, and if it is involving the US State Department and the EU, potentially we could benefit from that oversight, but we don't really know much about it for now, so we have to just be vigilant and
yes, I mean, look,
watch.
it's totally legitimate to fight against disinformation, this malign interference from dictatorships like Russia. I mean, this is a big problem in the EU, but I'm not sure it's a burning problem in Albania. And we have this context here, and as you mentioned, the anti-defamation package, it was a very bad experience, and RSF has also fought against it, and finally, during my last visit, it was withdrawn eventually. So, if any steps are taken, there has to be like a debate, inclusive debate, and these actors that you mentioned, especially the EU, have to be involved to really put things straight.
I think, yes, I agree. I don't think external influence and misinformation is a big burning issue. It's not at the moment, and especially when you compare it to the other countries in the Western Balkans, but we do have issues with it internally as well, which I think is an issue. But then, that line between media, what's published on social media, who's funding NGOs, etc., this line has to be drawn very carefully. We need to approach it with great care. I guess also it could be a forward-looking commission. It could be a forward-looking step, like, okay, we're not really struggling with external influence too much right now, but let's put this in place before that happens. But I reserve my judgment until I've seen exactly what the scope is going to be, what the accompanying laws will be, if any, what penalties there'll be. Because, we've had attempts at similar things in Hungary, not good there. In Poland, in France, they've passed a law very recently on foreign interference, which, I mean, I consider France quite a democratic country in many ways. I don't foresee many issues with it. But the EU directive on this matter has been quite controversial. So
I wouldn't compare France and Albania. However, you mentioned Hungary, and also currently in Bosnia,
and
in
Slovakia.
Republika Srpska, there is a proposal on foreign agents label that potentially can mean administrative harassment and intimidation of journalists, like in Hungary, and based on the Russian model. Yes, I mean, one thing I want to say about this is the best way to fight disinformation is to support those who spread trustworthy information. Yes. So to support the media and the journalists who are really independent and respect journalistic ethics.
Quickly, my last question. When can we expect the next World Press Freedom Index?
The next World Press Freedom Index will be published on the 3rd of May, the International Day of Press Freedom. That's as much as I can say now. It's a
I've been
teaser.
Trying to get something out of you, but
the problems that we see in Albania are global in different proportions. political attempts on press freedom, disinformation in the online space, especially propaganda, and of course lack of trustworthiness, lack of trust in general in the media, and RSF, is fighting for the public interest of right of citizens to information, and for that we really need a strong independent media.